Hey guys, my name's Crystal Kenny, and I'm in love with creating. All things artistic and imagination involved. I'm an American girl who chased her creative dreams all the way to Paris, France, making a living using photography. This podcast takes you inside the stories of all the artsy folks I've met along the way and gives you that extra push to discover your creative gifts. The desire to create is deeply inside each and every one of us, and I give you the tools and inspiration to find a new way of living a more creative life. This is Vie Creative, the podcast. Claudine Hemingway is a descendant of famed writer Ernest Hemingway. We bumped into each other at a party and decided to team up and dive deep into French history, but with a twist, by bringing a spotlight to those lesser-known creatives in France. This is History with a Hemingway. Welcome back to Paris History Avec, a Hemingway, and today we are talking about the early years of Ernest Hemingway, someone who is very close to Claudine's heart. So we're going to learn a little bit about what Ernest was doing in his early years and just go down a history road as usual. So I'll let Claudine take it away from here.
Yeah, specifically those early years in Paris. So because today, the day this is released, it's 100 years ago today that he arrived in Paris.
I can't believe it's been that long.
I know, which is just crazy. But, backing up a tiny little bit, on September 3rd, 1921, Ernest Hemingway, and Hadley Richardson's got married. They got married in Bay Township, Michigan. They had big plans that they were going to move to Italy because she had come into an inheritance from her uncle. So they thought, we should just move to Italy because, your money kind of goes farther when you're in Europe. And so they decided they were going to do that. So they got married in Michigan. They moved pretty quickly over to a very small fourth floor, cramped and shabby apartment in a poor neighborhood filled with broken furniture, is what he called it.
Sounds like my first year in France.
Yeah. It was it's at 1239 North Dearborn in Chicago, and I went there, and it is not at all a poor neighborhood now. It is a very rich neighborhood. And it's really funny because the building where it's in, it has like a little, not even a plaque, like a little, like a case that you would find in like the hallway of your high school where they would, thumbtack notices up. And so this guy has it on the fence, and it basically just has papers that says Hemingway lived here. And it's like, it's totally like the papers are like, warped because it got wet. It's just, I was like, come on, buddy, you got to do a little bit better.
That's just bad.
Yeah. But he met Sherwood Anderson in Chicago, and Sherwood Anderson was a writer himself. He started out in advertising. And in 1912, he kind of went crazy. He got up in the middle of the day. He was married. He got up in the middle of the day. He called his wife and said he was leaving. He basically walked out and disappeared for 3 days.
What?
He showed up at a pharmacy and basically was like, I don't know who I am or where I'm supposed to be. And he kind of had a nervous breakdown. The advertising firm took him back because they were like, you're eccentric, you're crazy, he's perfect for advertising.
Oh wow.
But he went back. He basically told his wife that they had 3 kids. He was like, I'm done with this. I don't want to be with you anymore. He ended up very quickly getting married a second time to a woman named Tennessee. And in May 1920, he ended up going to Paris. So he visited Paris. He took his second wife with him. And this was basically this is at the start of the arrival of a lot of the Americans. So he's in 1920, he goes there. Sherwood goes there, and he goes to this English bookstore he had heard about. That was on Rue Jacob, and that's where he's standing outside there, and he meets this woman, comes outside, starts talking to him, and it's Sylvia Beach. So he had told Sylvia that he, had heard about this bookstore, and because Gertrude Stein, who he had really admired her very unknown books at the time, he had read some of the books that she wrote, and she talked about Shakespeare and Company, and that had opened the year before, and so he wanted to go and check this out. So he goes there, and then Sylvia says, "Oh, well, Gertrude's here all the time. You must meet her." So he meets Gertrude Stein. He's there for a couple months. He ends up helping out Gertrude because when she first published her books, it was very basically probably our version of self-publishing at the time, like very small publishing houses that really didn't distribute it. But somehow he was able to get a couple copies of her early books. And but he had these contacts. He knew of big publishers. So Gertrude is, of course, like, "You're my new best friend." And so then he, ended up getting to know Gertrude pretty well. He met all these other expats that were in Paris at the time. He goes back to Chicago. He had just met this young Ernest Hemingway, and they go to lunch, and he tells them all about Paris. He tells them all these stories and all these people. And at the time, Ernest and Hadley were planning on going to Italy. They had actually already, any money that they were making, they were having it, changed into, I think, Italian lira. And so they have this money that they thought, okay, well, this is great. Now we're going to go there. But Sherwood convinced them that they needed to go to Paris.
Interesting.
He said, good thing. So because he's like, your money will go even farther. And there's already this great group of people that I'll introduce you to.
Fun.
So Sherwood wrote all these letters for him to be given. Like, he wrote like 9 or 10 different letters and said, when you get there, mail them. They were already put in envelopes, already with these addresses. When you get there, just mail these to these people. And they are all looking forward to seeing you. So on December 8th, 1921, Hemingway left for New York on the SS Leopold. And so he and Hadley, of course, they traveled across the Atlantic. While they were on the ship, he wrote in a letter to Sherwood after they arrived that Hadley was the hit of the entire cruise because she every night would play the piano for everybody on board, and everybody loved her. And he also wrote in the same letter that he basically, at night, sometimes they'd roll up the carpet and he would take on different people boxing. And there's all these stories in Movable Feast and all these other stories of his boxing prowess and how he would beat everybody up and he was so good at it. But almost every one of those stories is basically made up. Because he, like the guy that he said that he was boxing with on the ship, actually they figured out that the guy wasn't even on the ship. Like, he was like the kind of some famous guy, some famous boxer, and he wasn't even on the ship.
Oh, wow.
So he kind of liked to have these boastful stories. But they ended up going, and they stopped on the way. The ship stopped in Vigo, Spain for 4 hours. And they got off the ship and walked around. And he ended up loving it. It was the first time he saw Spain. He ended up loving it and calling it a real man's town because you could go there and you could fish and you have all these mountains that you see these mountain ranges and that he said it was a real man's town, that he was going to have to come back to that. But on December 20th, so 100 years ago today, the Leopold docked into Le Havre, and they took a train that day and got into Paris that night and checked into the Hotel Jacob, l'Angleterre, which is on Rue Jacob in the 6th on the left bank. And that's where Sherwood Anderson had told him that they needed to stay.
I love that Sherwood influences so much.
Yeah. So he basically, this is where a lot of the expats would stay. It was basically what he called a hostel. Mm-hmm. And, Ernest would write about this later, saying that the stairs were basically a trap for drunks because the stairs were so bad that if you were drunk, you would just basically fall down because they were like warped and in just such bad shape. And so then he said it was just basically the trap for drunks. Now, of course, it's a little more expensive, as just about any place that he talked about is now. But they say that some of it is basically still the same. The courtyard in there is still the same. I read somewhere that they said the stairs were still the same, but there's no way they couldn't be 100 years later. I mean,
Yeah,
they just, it's wood, at some point you have to change that out. But Louis Galantier was another expat. He was born in Chicago. He had gone to Paris at the end of 1920. He met Sherwood when he was there in 1921. And it was Galantine who would actually introduce Sherwood to all of the other left bank expats that were there. So Sherwood, was just doing the neighborly thing and just passing on all of his knowledge that he got from Louis. Louis was working at the International Chamber of Commerce in Paris, and he was also translating French literature into English, which he did for almost all of the rest of his life.
Oh, that's cool.
So he would do everything from, the Little Prince to the works of Voltaire and Molière. And so he basically did that the rest of his life. But before they arrived, it was Louis that actually made their reservation for them at the Hotel Jacob. And on that very first night, they ended up having dinner just down the street, just a few steps away from the hotel at the Pré aux Clercs, which is still there today. They went there for dinner, and he said that two could get a high-grade dinner there with wine a la carte for 12 francs.
What a deal.
I know. It's not that way now. But they ate there quite often there that first week and a half that they stayed in Paris. They said that for breakfast, they would go out and eat breakfast different places, but they would a lot of times just have their dinner there. And when you go to Pré aux Clercs, which is actually really great, I had their chicken that they have is delicious. And I had a client that wanted to go there specifically because they had gone there like 10 years ago and had the chicken and thought it was so amazing that they had to go there on their when they returned to Paris.
Oh, you have to eat the chicken there.
But when you walk in the door, they have on the front of where the bar is, it has all of these books by Hemingway. And so they really, they hold on to that story, which as most places do. But in that same letter, he wrote that he told Sherwood, and on the 23rd of December, he wrote the letter about the Pré aux Clercs. But he also said that day that they were sitting outside the Café Dôme in Montparnasse, and Hemingway said, "It's so damn cold outside, and the brazier makes it so warm. We drank rum punch, and the rum enters into us like the Holy Spirit."
I like that.
Only Hemingway. But he also said, and I love this one, is that we've been walking the streets day and night, arm through arm, peering into the courts and stopping in front of the windows.
Well, that's sweet.
So it's like, it's still the same. We all still do the same thing. On Christmas, they both decided they were going to splurge and go out for dinner. And so they went to the Café de la Paix, which is just right there in front of the beautiful Palais Garnier, the opera house on the right bank. But they didn't plan on it being as pricey as it was. And they didn't bring enough money with them.
Whoops.
And so back in that day, I mean, this is 100 years ago, 1921, we didn't have debit cards and everything else. So he left Hadley sitting there. He walked back to the Hotel Jacob, which is a good 25 minutes, probably 20 minutes, 25-minute walk. He walked back to the hotel to get some money and then returned to pay the bill.
Oh, wow.
Leaving poor Hadley just sitting there. But he would use the cafe later, and the sun also rises. And so it obviously left an impression on him. Now, of course, the Café de la Paix is pretty expensive. And I went there one day for lunch, and it was not great for what they were charging for a salad.
Not impressive.
But if you sit outside and you look at the front of the Palais Garnier. And so, you know what? It's completely worth it because it's such a beautiful building to sit and look at. It's totally worth the price. And I think I had a salad, and then I think it was like a tomato and mozzarella or something. And it wasn't fantastic for, I think, it was like $25, 25 euros.
Worth it.
Yeah. But a few days after Christmas, on December 28th, he walked into the now moved Shakespeare and Company. It had moved from Rue de Boutrin around the corner to the Rue de l'Odéon, which is where one of my favorite streets in the entire city. So he walked over there to go check it out because Sherwood had told him all about the wonderful Sylvia. He was armed with the letter that Sherwood wrote for him to give to Sylvia, but he didn't need to give it to her because as soon as they met, it was true love. And he always... they each talked very glowingly about each other. He always called her dear Sylvia. And in Movable Feast, he wrote about her wonderful smile and her great legs.
Her great legs.
And one of my favorite parts when Ken Burns did the documentary, which I have some issues with, that was on out last spring. But one of the best parts of the entire thing was about a 2-minute video of Sylvia Beach talking about her meeting Hemingway, and she was just the cutest little thing. And I was like, literally, that was like the best part of the entire documentary because I'd never seen her talk before.
Yeah. What's her voice like?
It's very kind of like, and Hemingway. It's kind of a high pitch. It's kind of like but it's really adorable. And it was just like, her face was just like glowing when she talked about him. And it was adorable because all of the things, he wasn't a perfect person. Of all of the wives that he had, Hadley talked about him fondly still. They were still friends until the end of his life. But dear Sylvia probably was one of the only women in his life that they still remained close and on good terms.
Good. I'm glad they didn't totally break up.
No, they stayed together. But they were really cute. And so Shakespeare and Company, when it went to the Rue de l'Odéon, and that's most people think that was the only location, but that was the second location. The first location was just around the corner, and it was open on November 19th, 1919. And then, of course, she moved over there, and we did a whole episode about Sylvia, so you could hear the whole story about her. But her partner, Adrienne Molière, had the store across the street that was the French bookstore, and she noticed that this antique company was boxing things up. And so she went over there and said, "What's going on? Are you leaving?" And then she told Sylvia, like, "Hey, you need to come over here. It's bigger, has more space." And so Shakespeare and Company was basically like the headquarters of the expats. People would use it to have their mail come there. They'd pick up their mail. They'd come all the time. James Joyce would sit there almost every single day in the window writing. And then, of course, she published Ulysses. But, it basically became like the epicenter of the expats in Paris.
Yeah, so I love that.
You all had to go in there. Now, she ended up, that was number 12, Rue de l'Odéon. She ended up moving to number 18. And that is where she lived the rest of her life and where she died. And that is where my friend, author John Baxter, lives. And I call him my own Shakespeare and Company because I have my mail sent to him.
He is yours.
He is mine. Like, he's now where I go. So if I have stuff that people need to send me while I am in Paris, they send it to him.
Smart.
On Rue de l'Odéon. But while, she also had, because at the time people didn't have a lot of money. And so she wasn't making a lot of sales when she first opened the store. So she decided to create a lending library. And so you would buy a subscription. And when the Hemingways first arrived on that December 28th, he writes about this story in Movable Feast, but he dates it into the start of January, but it was actually December 28th that they met. And so he went in there and he and Hadley bought a subscription. So for 12 francs a month, you could check out 2 books. Well, the next week they came back because they had already gone through so many, they already read the 2 books and they still had, the entire month left. And so they upped it to where the 30 francs a month, and then it was 4 books that they could get. But Sylvia always let them take a little bit more because he was her favorite customer. And so he kind of let them take out as many books. This is where they could also find magazines, Vanity Fair and magazines that were in English. She would also basically have the books that were banned in the US that you couldn't get, because they were filled with smut. Which is ridiculous. Like Ulysses was banned in the US. Just the kind of books that they were banning was just kind of ridiculous. But she was just this headquarters for everything. And so that's where, they would, all the expats would hang out there. They were just, she was, like I said, the center of like the expat community in Paris for like, 30 years. But at this point, they knew they were going to stay. And so they needed to find a place to live. And so this is Louis comes in handy again. He was, to helping them find a place to live. He suggested that they move into Montparnasse or around that side of the Jardin de Luxembourg. But he didn't want to stay around there because that's where all the expats were staying. And he and Hadley kind of wanted to stay away from where everybody was so that they could always kind of have their own time. So yeah, so it's, he's basically like, I don't want to stay where everybody else is. So they found a place that was on a fourth floor walk up at number 74, Rue de Cardinal Lamoine. And this is where, there's even a plaque on the building today. But they decided to move in there on January 9th, 1922. They moved in. There was no running water. It was above a bal musette, which was one of the dance halls, but it was winter. And so when they went there, all the windows were closed. And so it wasn't too bad. But by the time spring and summer rolled around, they realized it got a little bit noisier at night. Which I think sometimes the apartments in Paris, it's kind of like you don't go look at them, you go during the day. And then when you stay there at night, you realize,
whoops,
it's a little bit louder. But, it was right around the corner from Place de la Contrescarpe, which at that time was pretty dirty. This is the Latin Quarter. It was one of the older sections of the city. And, it definitely wasn't what you see of it today. They were able to rent it for 200 francs a month. That was furnished and with a femme de ménage. And so that equated to about $18 a month back then.
Oh my God. With a maid? That's amazing.
With a maid. They could live in Paris at the time for $1,000 a year.
Oh my gosh. I'm so jealous.
I know. I mean, that's like a week now.
That doesn't even pay my rent.
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty cheap. But their femme de ménage, she was really cute. Her name was Marie Coquette. That's what he called her, Marie Coquette. She would come by in the morning and she would empty the garbage and bring up the water because there was no running water in the apartment. There was no plumbing. There was a Turkish toilet in the hallway on the landing. A Turkish toilet is basically a hole in the floor. And
squatty potty.
2 outlines of where you put your feet. So, and apparently they still have some of these. And there's Cheryl.
I had one in my old apartment.
Oh,
terrifying.
Terrifying. I think I would always have to leave and go to, find different cafes every single day.
That's what you get for $500 a month now.
Yeah. And so they had, the apartment had 2 rooms. The floors were slanted. If you put something on the high side of the room, it would come rolling and shifting down. But he sent a letter to his parents saying how amazing and wonderful it is and how they ended up, Hadley ended up getting a piano from a friend of hers. And because of the piano, a size of a piano, it was just an upright piano, not like a baby grand, which would probably take up one whole entire room. The upright piano did take up basically the room that would be, their living room, dining room and everything. So their table had to be put into the bedroom.
Oh my gosh.
But, they described this apartment as this wonderful, amazing place, that to his parents and to everybody in letters, that it was just this fantastic place. But, it was cold. It was noisy in the summer, the slanted, floors, no running water. But that was typical then. It wasn't like now. I mean, if you went to Paris now and had an apartment with no running water, it'd be, I don't think you can legally. But, back then, that's kind of how they all were.
And that also sounds like my old apartment, quite honestly. For $500 a month.
For $500, yeah. So I mean, it's probably maybe with inflation, maybe that'd be about the same price that they paid for it. But it was kind of typical back then. But he still looks back and says that was basically when they were young and in love and that was their happiest period.
Yeah,
as well. Of course, because it was around the corner from Place de la Contrescarpe, there was some cafes there, and we talked about this a few months ago when I talked about some of the myths of his life. A lot of people, and I see this all the time on Instagram, and other people basically, they wax poetically about like this amazing Place de la Contrescarpe and how it inspired him. Well, at the time, it wasn't great. It was filled with drunks. It was the people that were there were stinky because the whole area was just smelled. And Hadley wrote that in letters saying she didn't even like going through it because it was just gross, and it was stinking, and people were sitting there, everybody there was drunk, but not like the fun drunks, like street people drunks, unfortunately. And so, there was the Café des Amateurs, which he would sometimes would write about how he would sit there and write, but he didn't really like to because it wasn't like now. I mean, now it's just completely restaurants all the way around. It's also during the day, there's always a lot of students because you're so close to the Sorbonne. And so, but back then it wasn't great. But a lot of people talk about it, about like, oh, I'm going to sit here all day and drink wine and be inspired like Hemingway. It's like, well, no, you're not.
Yeah.
But
No.
so around the corner, he ended up renting at number 39 Rue Jacob. He ended up renting a very, very tiny room on the very top floor. He says it was either the 6th or 7th floor. When he writes about it later, he doesn't really remember what floor it was, but it was the top floor. It was very small. It basically just had a table, a window that looked at the back of the Pantheon, and it had like a little wood fire. So he would basically take up some oranges and basically little bundles of twigs to keep him warm. But he would always say he'd have to take the oranges home with him, or else they'd come back the next day and they'd be frozen.
The joys of living in Paris.
Yeah. So he basically would sit up there and he would write during the day. He basically just did it as an office. There is a plaque on the building. It is also the same building where poet Paul Verlaine died. But there's a plaque there that says that Hemingway lived there from 1921 until 1928. He rented it in 1922 and he didn't live there. So that's where you learn you don't believe everything you read on those plaques. Because anybody could have those plaques made. It's a lot of red tape, as things are in France, to get them created, but they don't fact check it. So if you go through the process, you put it up there. So, I see that all the time too, saying that he lived there and he just had this little office, and he only had it there for about a year. So as soon as they arrived, they moved in on January 9th. As soon as they arrived, they left. So they left later that day for 2 weeks to go to Switzerland because it was dreary and raining in Paris, and they just said it was miserable. So they decided to leave. They went to Switzerland for 2 weeks to go skiing. And in letters, he said that they went to go fill their lungs with the crisp, cold air. And so then they stayed there for two weeks, and then they came back to Paris. March 8th is when he finally met Gertrude Stein. He did send her the letter of introduction, and she invited them over. They stayed in this apartment until August 26, 1923, because that is when they left to come back. They moved to Toronto because she was pregnant and was going to have a baby.
A baby named Bumbley.
Bumby. His nickname was Bumby. He hated that. As he got older, he hated it. But Jack, or John Hemingway, mostly he was called Jack, but he was born October 10th, 1923 in Toronto. They signed a 3-year lease there, but they hated Toronto so much they left as soon as they could. On January 30th, they left to return to Paris. They arrived, and on February 8th, they moved into their apartment at 113 Notre Dame des Champs. That was over a sawmill. So they changed from living over a music hall to a sawmill. Sadly, that building is completely gone now. You could go to the spot where they once lived, but the building they lived, it was much bigger. This place was much bigger, but Madame Coquette ended up coming with them.
Oh.
And she helped look after Bumby. And then, of course, everything went downhill from there. So that is when, they, March 1925, he met Pauline. And then in 1926, a year later, their affair started. And then sadly, we all know how Hadley and Ernest ended. And then he ended up marrying Pauline, the second wife, to then marry Martha, the third wife, and then the fourth wife, Mary, the worst one of them all.
Home wrecker.
Well, a lot of people hate Pauline, I think, because of that, the historical fiction book, The Paris Wife. But I think Mary was the worst. We've done a podcast episode about Hadley, and we've done one about Martha, who I think was the most awesome. And I know you agree. But we will probably not do one about Pauline or Mary unless we did them together, and it would just make me mad the whole time.
Make me mad the whole time.
But yeah, so 100 years ago today, he first arrived. And of course, it's a very short period of his life. It was only really, 7 years that he lived in Paris. But I think it's the period that most everybody knows. It's definitely the one that's, because of Movable Feast and that being such a popular book. And then, of course, Midnight in Paris and then all these other things. It's kind of the period that most people know, even though it was really only 7 years. So it's kind of a shorter period of his life. But on January 9th, I will be back there. And so I plan on doing some live videos and stuff that day on the 100th anniversary of the day they moved into Cardinal-Lemoine.
Well, we can't wait to watch that. And don't forget to join Claudine on her weekly virtual tours of Paris. You can travel virtually with her and learn lots of fun history. And check out our website for more pictures and information, ClaudineHemingway.com.
Thank you for listening to Paris History Avec a Hemingway. If you want to find out some more, you could always find me on my Instagram page, Claudine Bleu Blanc Rouge, and that's Bleu, as in the French way to spell it. And each day I post a daily history lesson about a person or a place or something in Paris, or it's lots of fun facts. And then also at ClaudineHemingway.com, where you can also sign up for my newsletter there.